right, I am back, not with a Hades video. I keep meaning to do a Hades video. I even recorded footage, but another Xbox video because the situation over there just keeps getting crazier. This week we obviously talked about the shutdown of Tango and Arcane Austin, the developers of Hi-Fi Rush and Redfall, respectively. The decision to shut down the studios, especially that made Hi-Fi Rush, seems insane, but sort of reflects many larger problems with Xbox, of which there was a lot of reporting yesterday about various new things related to this. There is currently a debate about whether or not to put Call of Duty on Game Pass. There's talk about, what's going to happen with Hellblade 2, if that could be successful, quote unquote, but not good enough for Microsoft. They might put that on PlayStation to sell copies because it'll be on Game Pass. And all of these issues sort of come back to the same thing. And that is a lot of questions about Microsoft's Game Pass model, how games are allowed to perform there, and what it takes to be considered a success there. My problem with this is that we simply have no real frame of reference in terms of what Microsoft considers a success on Game Pass and what their plan is for the future. The Call of Duty question feels like a real kind of linchpin moment for this entire concept, where you've said the whole time all your exclusive games are going to be, day one Game Pass, so that should, in theory, include Call of Duty. But in doing that, you give up billions of dollars in revenue over the long term for, forgoing those sales on a platform where Call of Duty is extremely popular. So you're kind of screwed either way. But I'm leaning toward the fact that I think they're going to triple down on Game Pass and put it there as one last lure to get people to sign up. What I don't understand is what the plan is for longer term subscriber growth of Game Pass, because we know it has slowed just absolutely exponentially compared to the big surges that we saw during the pandemic. Everyone was home, everyone was gaming more. The value of Game Pass kept going up and up and up with all the stuff added. But at a certain point, you've just reached saturation. And there are really very few wells left to, dig into for more subscribers. And I don't think Microsoft has come out with a coherent argument, for Game Pass to continue to expand at this point, and why they should continue to just solely rely on Game Pass as sort of the future and put all their exclusives on there day one, and like why that is a good way to support the ecosystem. Again, I'm not arguing this is bad for players. Like, this is not, it's quote player friendly, but obviously I think it is causing larger damage with the platform as a whole. And if your platform is damaged beyond repair, guess what? You don't really get to experience as many good games, or you see talented studios shut down like we're seeing already in layoffs. The Game Pass ecosystem is heavily limited by Xbox console sales. That is very clear at this point, because what is there beyond Xbox console sales? There is PC, where games launch day and date on PC, and then in Game Pass Ultimate, you can get these day one Xbox games on PC. Even still, if you are a dedicated PC gamer, you are probably gaming most of the time on Steam. That may or may not be enough for you to subscribe. Like, if you're a primarily PC gamer, are you going to be convinced necessarily to subscribe to Xbox Game Pass for Game Pass releases on PC? Maybe, but I think there's a relatively small pool of harder core PC gamers that are also bothering to sign up for Xbox Game Pass, and I do not think that is a segment that is growing. Another segment that Microsoft is really, really, nuts to go after is this idea that people who do not own consoles will want to subscribe to Xbox Game Pass so they can play through other devices through cloud streaming. This is, playing on your tablet, playing on your smart TV, like all these other places you can play Xbox games without needing a console. The problem is cloud gaming is a really, really niche market, and it is really slowly expanding over time. It is a tiny part of the market, as Microsoft itself said in its court cases where there were concerns about having a cloud streaming monopoly. But they're like, it's barely a part of the business. It's fine. It doesn't matter. But like, that is something that they believe is going to be part of the future. But I have not seen the tech, evolve to a point where that feels necessary. But even conceptually, I don't think this makes a lot of sense because like the games you have on Xbox Game Pass, granted, it's a wide range of games, but you're asking people to pay, what is it, 100, 140, 160, I don't even know what it is now. It's a lot for access to all of these games, the vast majority of which are like really traditional core video games. And if you are really into traditional core video games, you probably own an Xbox or a PlayStation or a PC already. I don't think there is this giant untapped market of gamers that would be, really into these games. Would they just not have to spend $300, $400, $500 on a console? Instead, I think at best, you are going to end up with people that don't buy an Xbox. And instead of buying an Xbox, they just do Game Pass and cloud gaming, which cuts into your Xbox sales. And speaking of Xbox sales, we know that they've stopped reporting these numbers like forever at this point because they were so far behind their competition. It was just sort of embarrassing every time they reported them. And they say they don't care as much. They just want, gaming revenue. They want Game Pass numbers and stuff like that. But again, like the primary way you expand Game Pass is expanding consoles because that is the primary way most people are going to want to subscribe. And if you're limiting your reach by like, quote, not caring about consoles and you're fine with 30% declines over and over and over again with your hardware because you're making the case that you don't need an Xbox. You can play on PC. You can play on your tablet. You don't even need, Game Pass. You can just wait for the port to PlayStation, which just started, but like it is going to start ramping up and up with more and more games. And they've just been selling the idea that you don't need an Xbox, even though I would argue the Xbox is the primary point which these subscriptions are generated. So it feels like they just have so few cards left to play. I think one of those cards is Call of Duty because Call of Duty is a big enough game, big enough series where if you say, okay, if you subscribe to Game Pass, you are going to get the new Call of Duty every year for free, quote unquote, even though the total cost of Game Pass is obviously more than a yearly Call of Duty game. That could be a draw for some players that may not otherwise be subscribed yet. That could convert some PlayStation players, but like, again, I don't know how much room for growth this is. It feels like everybody that owns an Xbox that wants Game Pass is probably going to have it at this point, and especially if they keep upping the price, which they are allegedly going to do again, that is not going to encourage even more signups from those that are kind of on the fence about it. And it feels weird to rely on Game Pass sustainability and Game Pass growth in a way where there does not feel like there's a clear path forward in terms of how to grow the ecosystem. And, Microsoft always wanted to be the Netflix of gaming. They thought, okay, Netflix is destroying everyone with its subscription model. Like, we can do that too. Like, it's going to be, we're going to be first in class. And, while Game Pass is, the most successful model of its kind in terms of like a system that offers sort of day one releases of big games, it's different than the streaming space. Like, first of all, a bunch of other rival streaming services to Netflix trying to do the same thing have failed or are failing or are losing tons of money because it is very hard to execute this and produce, high quality content that is offset by subscription numbers and payments. And then Netflix themselves, they're having trouble because their market is saturated as well for the most part. So they're trying to pull out their last bag of tricks, like killing password sharing and things like this. I think they're going to not report subscriber numbers going forward too, because Wall Street hates every time their subscriber numbers don't grow or go down a little bit. But Netflix, contrary to Microsoft, cranks out, really, really popular and or good shows all the time. Like, every week goes by and there's a couple of new Netflix shows. Like, if they're not, some of them are really good. Many of them are not, but even the not good ones are really widely watched. It's a reason for, people to keep their Netflix subscription because there's always something new. That's not true with Game Pass. The Game Pass idea is like, yes, it has this larger collection of games. Old games are added to it over time. And then there's these day one releases, but these big day one releases for Game Pass are so few and far between. How many truly huge Game Pass releases are there a year? 2, 3, maybe? Like last year it was like Starfield and it was Hi-Fi Rush, which was a surprise. Those were like the main ones, more or less. And in this year it's what? Hellblade 2, and then if they maybe do Call of Duty, like again, it's like 2 big releases a year as opposed to Netflix where you can peruse through 3, 4, 5, 6 new shows and movies every week. It's a different system. And like Microsoft cannot pump out games like that. This quote from Matt Booty that they need, smaller games that are big hits, like you're not turning around games in, 14 months or like a year and a half. Like even these, quote small games, Hi-Fi Rush took 4 or 5 years. Something that just seems like, oh, this is a fun project by like a couple of dudes, like Power World still took 3 years. Like you cannot just crank out huge hits in a short amount of time in order to like keep people being like, oh, there's this on Game Pass, there's this on Game Pass. Like the industry doesn't work like that. And granted, there are problems not doing this. I've talked many times about Sony and their giant budgets on their games have to be offset by these big sales, and they're running into issues there. They really need to start relying on live games for ongoing revenue, which they had Helldivers as a huge success, despite their recent hiccup. That's still a big success for them. And then you have, the place that's performing the best, obviously, is always Nintendo, who is not doing layoffs, who is, expanding things, about to launch new hardware. Nintendo always sort of has it made lately, but there are cross problems between the PlayStation model and the Microsoft model. But it feels to me like the Game Pass issues are easier to see, and I don't think Microsoft has a coherent or compelling vision in terms of how Game Pass extends into the future and is sustainable. The room for growth does not appear to be there. Even if cloud gaming became like the number one source of gaming in the country, which it is not going to be, I wouldn't say it's going to be in 10 years. I still don't think it will. You still run into the conceptual problem of trying to convert non-console gamers into cloud gamers playing the same games. And again, I don't think the barrier to entry for gaming is owning a console or not. It's just whether it's like sort of part of your lifestyle, if you have time to play, if it interests you. The console barrier, if you remove the console barrier, all you're doing is selling less consoles. So again, potentially good for the player, which is great, but as a strategy for Microsoft, not great. And even if things, seem player forward, if they end up hurting the games, hurting development, hurting the developers, causing layoffs, causing brand trust erosion, it's not good ultimately for everybody. So I don't know what they're doing over there. I don't think they know what they're doing over there. The fact that they're debating whether or not to put Call of Duty on Game Pass, and it's about to be announced in a month, and they paid $70 billion for Activision Blizzard, where Call of Duty is their biggest series by far. Like, it's crazy that they would still like not have a coherent idea of what they're doing there. And this question extends to a number of games, like the smaller games. How is Hellblade going to be considered a success when all we have to go is Game Pass player count or whatever? Like, what is the metric? You would think, okay, maybe it's just acclaim. And then, Hi-Fi Rush, super well received, winning awards, all the acclaim you could want, they're dead. Doesn't matter. So what is the metric for success here? We don't know. It sucks. It's stupid. I feel for all the developers who are laid off, and it appears like more layoffs are probably coming, not just in the industry, but at Xbox specifically. And I'd say things are going to get worse before they get better, but like, I don't know. I just don't understand what they're doing. I don't think leadership has been good during this whole time period, and I think there needs to be a change. Anyway, thanks for watching. Maybe I'll get to Hades tomorrow. We'll see. But yeah, thank you. I'll talk to you later. Take care.